The Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I'm almost at a loss to know where to begin in making a contribution on part one of this terribly flawed legislation. Not only is the legislation flawed, but the process around it is flawed. The Act speaker earlier, speaking on an earlier clause, it touches me how far the Act Party can go in offending just about everybody. They used to refer to tikanga as mumbo-jumbo. In previous legislation, when we've been passing laws about treaty settlements, they have referred to tikanga as mumbo-jumbo. But today we've heard it called Alice in Wonderland stuff in relation to this legislation. And I'm just astonished at how far the ACT Party is prepared to go to offend as many people as possible. In this legislation, Mr Chairman, and I want to come to part one, which is the bit under discussion at the moment, there is such a divergence of opinion, only united in its opposition to this legislation, that it must almost be a precedent in this House. There are more people who disagree with this legislation from a variety of positions around the country than those who agree with it. Sometimes the National Party, Mr Chairman, has wanted to characterise the opposition to this bill as all being ACT members. I dare say they wish they had that many members, Mr Chairman. But I've got in my inbox file, under the title Foreshore and Seabed, 250-odd emails that oppose, for a variety of reasons, this legislation. And so when we come to Clause 4, in Part 1 of this bill, Clause 4 says the purpose of this Act is to establish a durable scheme to ensure the protection of the legitimate interests of all New Zealanders in the marine and coastal area of New Zealand. Then this legislation palpably fails to do that. We have been given assurances that there will be a revisiting of this legislation. And I'm sorry that this minister has been compelled by others, I suppose, to bring this legislation to the House in this way, at this time when the country's interests are rightly diverted to Christchurch, and he is being compelled to bring this legislation to the House and persist with it when it is clearly not going to satisfy a whole range of people for a whole range of interests. And let me just draw attention to why this will not be a durable scheme. Minister, I wish this were going to be a durable scheme. Nobody wants a durable scheme more than we do. We got the last legislation wrong in respect of the stripping of the right to go to court, to have claims tested. We got that wrong, and we have said so, and we have apologised. So that remains on the record. What we have also done, Mr Chairman, is to say that we want a durable scheme. We want to establish a durable outcome to ensure the protection of the legitimate interests of all New Zealanders, not on our terms, Mr Mapp, but on mutually agreed terms. And this government is going to ram this through by a margin of 62 to 59. 62 votes to 59 was the last vote a few minutes ago. That does not augur well for Clause 4 of Part 1. Mr Chairman.
Honourable Mary Ann Street.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. That does not augur well. That is a margin of 3 votes. Something as important as this, which should be durable, which should be testable, which should be able to withstand criticism and should be able to be justified to everybody across the country, then that is not sufficient of a margin, Mr Chair, by which this legislation should pass. This is too important. Can I say one of the things that, Mr Hanari's just said, the magic words, we don't care. We don't care. Mr Hanari has just said the magic words, the National Party does not care about the interests of all New Zealanders. Peter Sharples has said that the Māori Party is not entirely happy with the bill, and neither are iwi leaders or the general public. I want to pick up one part of that, which also goes to this question of how durable this legislation or this scheme will be. And that is that there is not one iwi, there is not one iwi around the country that supports this legislation. Mark Solomon and the iwi leaders have said that they oppose this legislation. He has said it to me personally. I have heard him say it. There is not one iwi around the country that supports this legislation. Well, let's just go to Mr Flavel, to Te Ororoa Flavel from the Māori Party. Let's just go to his comments when he has said, in fact, that we will be going back. We will be looking at it again, he said publicly, and there would be another time for our people to come back and have another go in the future. Minister, I wish this were a durable scheme. I wish this were a piece of legislation that acted in the interests of all people. But the opposition to this comes from right across the political spectrum. It comes from the offensive comments of ACT right through to iwi leaders. It comes from right across the political spectrum. And that, Mr Chairman, makes this legislation faulty, fragile and able to be undermined at a moment. And that is what will happen to this. We have an opportunity, Minister, to get this right. This does not need to be rushed. It certainly doesn't need to be rushed under cover of the Christchurch earthquake. It doesn't need to be taken at this pace. The Select Committee process did not need to be aborted in the way that it was. The Select Committee members did not need to have legal advice denied. The fact that they've got Simon Bridges on their side of the Select Committee does not constitute independent legal advice. It does not constitute independent legal advice. And if one was to have a look at the departmental report, one can see quite clearly on page 59 of the departmental report that there are numbers of submitters, but I've had a look at the report, which some of the members of the Select Committee might have done well to do. But one can see from this, Mr Chairman, that there were submitters who were concerned that the bill, as it has finally emerged, was not the same as the government's proposal set out in its consultation document. And so there needed to be more time for the integrity of the legislation, for the integrity of the process. There needed to be more time taken on this. The process is a travesty. The fact that Mr Hanari doesn't care is a travesty. And this legislation, which could have the complete support of this entire House, Mr Chair, has been an opportunity lost. I'm sorry that it is an opportunity lost, Minister. It could have been better than this. I'm sorry the Minister has been rolled in this process. It did not need to happen like this, and the Select Committee process did not need to be impaired and aborted in the way that it was. And so, Mr Chairman, what we have here is not something that is going to deliver the purpose of this Act, a durable